Hey Fromville, it's Julie B. Deep Dives, and today I'm diving into Season 3, Episode 3 of From Mousetrap. This is not a recap. There's a lot to unpack in this episode, so this video will deep dive into the Episode 3 events inside of Fromville while Tabitha is away. Please leave a like and subscribe if you like this video, and without further ado, let's get into it. Let's start with the cruelest prank phone call ever made. Jim's call from this entity calling itself Thomas, the name of his deceased baby. As I've said in a previous video, this is clearly a Fromville entity messing with Jim's head, in my opinion. Now, after this scene, it's even more clear to me. This is not really Thomas. Jim's child lost his life around 2 years of age after falling off a changing table. Even if he had somehow survived, he wouldn't have the language skills we hear from this call. Some fans actually have an interesting theory, though, that maybe it's Thomas from an alternate timeline or parallel universe, a timeline in which he's still alive. And this could be the case, but the dark tone of this call and the sinister terminology he uses, it undermines this idea. Unless Thomas from this other timeline is a bad seed demon child, so you never know. Thomas says, "Daddy, are you there?" And he says, "You are not my son." Fake Thomas comes out with a twisted round of questions, such as, "Why did you let Mommy go? Is it because you didn't love her anymore?" And he implies that Jim wanted something bad to happen to her. So Jim asks what the voice wants, which is actually a smart question, and it answers, "To help. You need help, Daddy. You should be watching Julie and Ethan. You shouldn't let them play outside so close to dark." This is eerily reminiscent of the voice on the radio from the Season 1 finale, when another disembodied voice warned Jim, "Your wife shouldn't be digging that hole, Jim." Jim took off running for his house when that happened, and once again he does the same thing here, takes off running to find his kids. And this time they don't seem to be in any danger, but it could be foreshadowing some future danger that they'll be in as it gets dark. This may have been the same entity that spoke to him on the radio, actually. I don't think it's a human being in either case, just an illusion taking the form of a voice. I think there are spiritual entities within Fromville, evil spirits, spirits of the deceased, maybe even deities, that are responsible for all the visions and mysterious voices. The malevolent entities try to manipulate people and inflict psychological warfare, while the benevolent entities, like maybe the spirits of the dead, try to send them messages for help. Back in Season 1, Ethan said they should ask themselves who here is trying to help after all. It's worth thinking about, but you could argue that this voice is trying to help, as it claims, warning Jim that his kids shouldn't be outside close to dark. But to reference Jim's missing wife and ask why he let her go, implying that he wanted her to lose her life, that's inflicting guilt upon him, and it doesn't strike me as a helpful entity. And just like Jim took off to find Tabitha, once again he takes off and finds his kids. And they're not in danger this time, but once again, whatever entity is responsible for this call made it clear that it's watching them, and it knew his kids were outside close to dark. That sense of being watched, it still continues. We know some entity is watching and listening to them wherever they are. And of course, on the way back, Jim runs into Boyd and doesn't tell him anything about the call, because we know no one communicates on this show. Later in the episode, Jim gets a second call, which is presumably also from fake Thomas, but hangs it up without answering. Interestingly, this is just moments after Julie and Ethan have left the room. They definitely should have heard the phone ring within earshot. And if they heard it, they would certainly come back, because everyone knows the phones don't work in Fromville. This is a sign to me that only Jim can hear this phone ringing, as Jeremy Eisenfire has also pointed out, as well as the voice on the other end. I don't think anyone would be able to hear that except Jim. So now we have yet another character who is seeing and or hearing things that others cannot. Yet another example of Fromville entities inflicting visions or voices upon the residents to mess with their heads, or manipulate them, send them messages. Jim joins the ranks of Jade, Boyd, Tabitha, Ethan, Victor, Sarah, Elgin, and the three from the cicada coma, Julie, Marielle, and Randall. all of whom have now had visions, premonitions, or voices in their heads. So I expect these calls to continue to keep psychologically messing with Jim's head this season. By the way, I find it suspicious that this phone call happened right after the events of episode 2, when this extremely suspicious priest met Tabitha. Actually, in episode 1, he met her, and Jim got his phone call in episode 2 at the very end. Now remember that this priest, he asked what the name of her deceased baby was. Somehow the priest knew the baby was a boy, even though Tabitha didn't specify a gender. Tabitha told him the baby's name was Thomas. Now all of a sudden a Fromville entity is calling Jim and saying he's Thomas? You have to admit the timing is uncanny here. I think that this priest has been fed information by a Fromville entity. That's my theory. Recall how Father Khatri thought he heard the voice of God for the first time in his life when he was about to jump off a bridge. It told him to get back in his car and drive, and 2 hours later he was in Fromville. So my theory is that just like Father Khatri, this priest heard a voice masquerading as God. It fed him information about Tabitha, that she would be coming. And I think the source of this voice is the boy in white, because he's the one who sent Tabitha here, seemingly, and guided her toward the church when he appeared to her as a vision on the street. It's not the first time he would have told someone is coming and to wait. He once told Victor that Tabitha would be coming down into the creature's cave and to wait for her. He seems to feed information to multiple people. So is the boy in white responsible for this phone call to Jim too? Maybe. He's already shown that he can change his voice. So maybe the boy in white also was responsible for the phone call. Recall that he faked an Ankui kid's voice to lure Tabitha to the top of the lighthouse tower. Just food for thought. Elsewhere, Boyd is planning to try something risky that relates to another long-standing popular fan theory, catching a monster, by luring one into a building and putting a talisman on the outside of it to see if it will keep them in. Donna and Ellis try to talk him out of it, but he's adamant on catching one and trying to make it talk through torture. He points out that they have no idea what the monsters are and where they come from still. Donna makes a good point that torture probably won't work because they don't even feel bullets hitting them, as Boyd reminds her that Christy said they were human at one point. But were they really? I would personally contend that it might have just appeared that these monsters were human. I believe they may have been pulled from a nightmare. Back in the 1978 timeline, I think this iteration of the monsters could have been pulled from a nightmare, such as young Victor, for example. Because we know that the monsters couldn't have always looked like this. If there were many past cycles, they couldn't have appeared like they were all from the 50s and 60s. And so maybe they were pulled from a nightmare and they were never human in the first place, because we've seen that things have been pulled from nightmares, physical things in this show, like that water from Elgin's bathtub dream. He brought that back from his nightmare. But I digress. Later, Boyd is making a memory board in the church for the people who have died, because they don't even have their names on headstones, and Ghost Khatri appears to him again. Khatri sarcastically criticizes Boyd's solid plan to catch a monster, and says he's been doing a pretty good job of keeping most people alive for 1.5 years, so why change things now? In my opinion, this Khatri illusion is just another evil entity that wants Boyd to accept the status quo and settle for keeping people alive, not try to go on the offense or find a way out. The real Khatri didn't want Boyd to settle for merely just keeping people alive. Remember that in season 1, he told Boyd, "You don't have the luxury of grief. You need to be the one to lead these people home." He pushed Boyd to take risks and was fully on board with Boyd's plan to go into the forest with Sarah to search for a way out. He even planned to go along with them before his untimely demise. Ghost Khatri, on the other hand, says Boyd will probably go in the house with the monster the next day and it'll jump out and rip him to pieces. I mean, honestly, it's a good point. And I think this plan is probably not going to work. But Ghost Khatri seems to have his own agenda here, and he's encouraging him to accept the status quo either way. And Khatri says, "You don't see it, do you? You can't even see what's staring you right in the face. Those things said they wanted to break you, and that means they wanted to change you. And yeah, he has a point. He has a point, but this is ironic coming from Ghost Khatri. I think he's been manipulating Boyd right in his face since season 2, and Boyd just doesn't see that. But Khatri makes a good point that the creatures wanting to change Boyd and make him do something reckless and foolish, yeah, he's onto something, but I still don't trust him. Boyd is right to want to finally go on the offense against the creatures, but he needs a more solid plan. In another memorable quote, Khatri says, "You might want to get down off of that cross of yours every now and then. I died because I was trying to help people. Tien Shen, she died because she was trying to help people. Do you have any idea how arrogant it is to diminish that sacrifice by making it all about you?" And here we have Boyd being compared to a Christ-like figure, which is fitting. Boyd has been acting like the savior of the town ever since he first arrived, as he saw "Save Us" painted on the barn, carrying the burden of saving the entire town on his shoulders ever since. Also, Khatri's use of the term sacrifice jumped out at me. Word choice is really important with this show. It's important to pay attention to the specific words being used. Now, in my episode 2 analysis part 1, I explained how the demise of Tien Shen might have served as a sacrifice to Fromville, which resulted in these crops seemingly magically appearing out of thin air the next day. Enough to feed the whole town, Jim said, right after the loss of Tien Shen, who was responsible for feeding the whole town. Now, if we look at the demise of Father Khatri, the theme of sacrifice with a reward in return is less clear. But if Khatri hadn't gone to Boyd that night to try to convince him to keep Sarah out of the box, he would probably still be alive. Khatri ultimately sacrificed his life to save Sarah's, and she became a vital resource because she could tap into this place in a way that no one else can. Now, heading over to Cabin Village. This episode is aptly called Mousetrap, and I believe I know why. At least one of the possible meanings. First of all, the people here have already been compared to rats in a maze by Jade, memorably in season 1. So the mouse part probably refers to the residents. Now, the food that magically appeared out by the lake, it seemed too good to be true. And while I still think it was a kind of reward for the sacrifice of Tien Shen, it may also come with its own price tag. It seems to be bait to lure them back out there, just like a mousetrap would have food in it as bait. And then Christy literally gets her foot caught in a bear trap, like a mouse getting caught in a trap. So, yeah, that might have something to do with this. When Kenny and his crew get to the village of cabins, the dialogue is interesting. Christy says she can't believe people actually lived out here. And Dale replies, "Are we sure they were people?" This is a great question. People should start listening to Dale, as unlikable as he is. And Jade says exactly what we in the fandom have all been speculating about. "Look at the way they're positioned," referring to the totems, he says. "They may have been using them the same way we use the talismans to ward off evil spirits." And Dale responds, "Great, let's just walk past the scary voodoo tower and go sort some veggies." Again, Dale may be a jerk, but he talks a lot of sense. And while the group is sorting the vegetables, Dale complains that Jade isn't helping them and makes a reference to Jade's company as he scribbles in his little book of symbols. It's interesting that Dale brings up Jade's company. The first reference since way back in season 1 to this company, his quantum computing company that he sold for an obscene amount of money. It's an interesting way to bring it back up, and maybe it's a clue that it could actually have something to do with all of this, like some have theorized. Might have some kind of connection to the mystery. Jade finds several rocks stained with something red on top. When he touches one, it triggers a vision of what looks like a Puritan man tethered to a tree with a spike through his eye, much like Kelly was tethered to a tree with a piece of rebar in season 2. He grabs Jade and chokes him as he struggles frantically. And then the next thing you know, Dale finds Jade and sees him struggling with nothing, making it clear to us from this vantage point that only Jade can see this vision. Now, I believe that most of the visions Jade has seen are warnings from people who have filled his role in past cycles. Like Christopher here, who we saw, and we know he saw the symbol because this was his book. And then there was the man under the boulder screaming, the Civil War soldier, and now this Puritan man. 2 out of 3 of these clearly met terrible fates, and we don't know what happened to Christopher yet, but I'd be willing to bet the same. There was also Jade's vision of this dummy that Tabitha and Victor saw in the cave, and Jade saw in this vision. I believe this dummy represents the fact that the evil entity wants to use Jade as a puppet. It even had the same exact scream soundbite as the guy under the boulder from that first vision, because I think that man served Jade's role or filled Jade's role in a past cycle. And this entity also wants to use Jade as a puppet, like he's done with past victims, like Christopher and everyone before them. I think these visions are trying to warn Jade of the horrific fate that he'll meet as well if he goes down the same path that they did. Since the visions are confusing and violent, people who have filled this role in different cycles may have misinterpreted them. Like Christopher, he probably mistook the visions as signs that blood sacrifice was somehow a way to escape. So I think he revealed everyone's hiding spots to the monsters and facilitated the massacre of 1978. Unfortunately, the visions are so terrifying that Jade is not understanding the message if this is a warning. It's either that or there is an entity trying to drive him to commit some kind of atrocity. Now, getting back to the group at the cabins, Kenny throws himself into the task of gathering food as Christy tries to be there for him and he pushes her away. Jade insists on going back to town after his vision, and as they try to talk him out of it, he just won't listen, even though he won't make it back before dark. Jade says he doesn't like it here, and Dale replies that no one does because it's a forest full of nightmares. Again, notice the word choice. Nightmares. There's that word again popping up, another reference to nightmares in the dialogue. Jade starts running off, and Christy follows him, but gets caught in a bear trap. They unsuccessfully try to free her, so Jade goes and breaks off some metal poles from the totems. Dale wisely points out with his usual sarcastic wit, this is a bad idea. You really want to start pulling apart the ancient tower of holy scary shit? But Jade pulls 2 metal poles off it, knocking a totem down. This can't be good. So this is another example of why people should start listening to Dale. He often has insight, but we're not supposed to take seriously as the audience, and neither to the characters. But in my opinion, he's right about the pocket dimension too. And he was right that the radio tower project was pointless. He once told Donna, sure, let's play make-believe, I'm game. And the radio was a bust, so he was right about that. Once again, taking apart that structure of 4 totems was not a good idea. Many of us have speculated that they could be another version of a talisman and ward off some kind of threat. Now check this out. In front of the structure that Jade took apart, there are 3 totems that are designed to match the old saying, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. This saying in Confucianism teaches about the importance of avoiding evil. You can see on the left, it looks like that one has stick arms covering its ears. The one in the center has pursed lips, representing speak no evil. And the one on the right has squeezed shut eyelids, which represents see no evil. So yeah, the symbolism is pretty clear to me. These things definitely ward off evil or contain evil in some way. Then behind them, we see these 4 totems, arranged in a diamond shape and connected. On closer inspection, this looks an awful lot like a talisman. The talisman has a diamond shape in the middle, a sort of stick figure person's head on top and bottom, and these stick figure crossed limbs. This group of totems had a similar diamond shape, and the only major difference is there are 4 stick figure type shapes, one at each point of the diamond, instead of just one on top and bottom. The crossed sticks here look like the crossed limbs on the talisman. Here are some images of the talisman to compare. And you can see there's a diamond right in the center. A person on top, a person on the bottom, and the sticks going up, like stick legs maybe. There's another image to look at. Thank you to Miss Comp, who made this discovery originally. And on YouTube, she goes by Purple Alizé. And also, Wayne Fishing and Robert Saunders worked together to really glean this insight, which I think is just an incredible detective work. I believe it's more evidence that these totems do ward off evil or keep it contained. And by taking it apart, Jade just made a grave mistake. With nightfall approaching, they really didn't have much choice but to find whatever they could to free Christy, which they do accomplish. And as they're about to snap Christy's dislocated ankle back in place, Jade is distracted by another vision of the Puritan man who was tethered to the tree earlier. And this time, he's drinking from what looks like a child-sized human skull. After that, he even appears to offer some, reaching out his hands with the skull like he's offering Jade a drink. Again, these visions could be of past residents who filled Jade's role. Either they're warnings to avoid the same path that they did, or maybe, as it seemed in Jade's vision of the kids on sacrificial slabs, an evil entity could be trying to convince Jade that blood sacrifice is necessary. But since this man's eye is gouged out and bleeding, this could be a warning not to follow the same path as him. It's hard to say because he does seem to be encouraging him to drink blood from the skull. So the jury's still out on that. We'll have to keep an eye on these visions going forward. Now, back at Colony House, there are some intriguing scenes between Tilly and Fatima. Fatima eats more rotten veggies, and Tilly just happens to see her do it, as she pops up at all the right times, doesn't she? There seem to be more crows hanging around than usual, too, and the closed captions actually pointed out cawing noises during this episode. Tilly seeks out Fatima in her room and tells her that she used to lick the insides of eggshells, as weird cravings are normal and temporary with pregnancy. Fatima breaks down and admits that she's terrified something's wrong with the baby, but she feels she can't tell Ellis or anyone else. She doesn't want to take away Ellis's happiness. Once again, people don't communicate like they should in this place. Fatima tells Tilly that she was never supposed to be able to conceive, but there's still no explanation to us as viewers as to why. Fatima just wants to know if the baby will be okay, and Tilly says that they can find out through tarot cards, which could be a nod to another popular fan theory. I get the feeling they're going to keep shouting out our fan theories all season long. I mean, Taran Matharu has had a very popular tarot fan theory from the beginning of the series, so it's pretty cool. Later, Fatima has a strangely meta moment with Tilly. The showrunners must know that many fans think Tilly is suspect, because it's as if a fan of the show actually wrote this. Fatima says, "Your whole kooky baddie Tilly shtick is fine in most circumstances, but how dare you?" Fatima points out that she doesn't know anything about Tilly. This seems like a nod to the fan theory that Tilly is a mole. And who knows, maybe she is. Tilly tells her that these cards played an important role in her life at a pretty critical juncture. They told her about her cancer, and this place, too. Not in so many words, but the signs were all there if I knew how to read them, she said. Fatima asks the cards if her baby is okay, and at the very moment when Tilly starts to turn over a card, a crow bumps into the window. Perfect timing. Can't be a coincidence there. And then Tilly tries again. Tilly kind of takes a deep breath, doesn't even seem surprised about the bird, and flips over a card, which we can't see on camera. At that exact instant, a crow crashes through the window and goes berserk, making frantic noises and crashing into stuff, and then knocking over a lamp and waking up Elgin, who had finally gotten a little sleep. A guy hits the crow, it crashes into a lamp, and blood splatters all over. This is not normal behavior for a bird. In my opinion, the cards were probably about to give some insight into the entity that's using Fatima as a vessel, not a normal human baby. And this evil entity the evil entity in charge, that is, like the big bad, sent the crow through the window to stop them from doing the tarot reading and giving her that insight. I've always felt that the crows seem to represent the watcher entity that's causing so much harm to the residents and controlling the monsters. This entity can probably even control what the crows do. For instance, maybe it causes the crows to gather when a car pulls up to a fallen tree. They start swarming up above on the other side of that tree, as if to scare them from going in that direction and stepping over the tree, which many fans have theorized could potentially prevent them from ending up in Fromville. Elsewhere, Victor is trying to recover lost memories and digs up a suitcase he had buried, probably many years ago, which likely contains a film projector, as Jeremy Ice and Fire pointed out. Victor shows up at Sarah's house and tells her they have to build a fort, and then he'll tell Sarah a story. He may have picked Sarah because he's aware that she has a deep connection to this place. And she's also an outsider like he is, although for different reasons, of course. In the second trailer released on Amazon, we saw that Victor was shown putting out what looks like a fire in their blanket fort, which will likely be caused by this film projector catching on fire before they can watch it all. This has happened with old projectors, and Fromville itself may cause that fire so that they can't watch the entire film and gain some insight about the past. This is another great point that Jeremy Ice and Fire raised in his live stream, and I agree. The film probably shows young Victor and Christopher. Hopefully. I would love to get more insight into that timeline. Hopefully they'll actually see something that actually is useful and gives us some sort of enlightenment as to what was going on back then, even if it's just some clues. Now, with Randall and Boyd, there were some pretty interesting scenes too toward the end of the episode. We saw that Randall is still seeing visions of cicadas attacking him. And as this happens on the bus, Boyd shows up and doesn't see anything. It's just like that moment when Dale showed up and saw Jade struggling against nothing. These invisible visions that were being shown as the audience, nobody can see except the person experiencing them. So the after effects of the cicada coma are still very much with Randall. Now he's still having visions of them that nobody else can see, much like how the boy in white and Nkui kids only appear to certain people. Jade's visions only appear to him, and I think Jim only hears the ringing phone and the voice on the other end, etc. Boyd tells Randall he wants to switch accommodations for the night, and he'll stay in the bus to watch the monsters, while Randall can stay in the sheriff's station. This must be the first phase of Boyd's plan to try to catch a monster. But hopefully he's not going to try to use the bus to catch one. I don't think that's a really smart plan. Just a quick observation here. Ethan's mindset is getting dark. He asks a lot of morbid questions and says morbid things, such as referring to who will bury his mom and her body lying out in the woods somewhere. And later at the diner here with Boyd and Bacta, Ethan says maybe they should just give up finding a way home. Bacta tells Boyd that she's still trying to process how a nursery rhyme her grandmother told her was tied to what happened with the cicada entity. Maybe it means either her grandmother was here and escaped, or a Fromville entity reached out and her grandmother heard it in a dream or a voice in her head, as I think these entities, like the boy in white, can reach out to people in the real world. My friend Wild Marjoram suggested that maybe her grandmother was one of the chosen ones, like Miranda and Tabitha, who tried to save the children. You never know. And once again, Boyd refers to game terminology. Remember, always pay close attention to the word choices in this show. He tells Bacta, no matter what this place throws at us, we're going to win. No matter what happens here, we're going to find our way home. Is that win terminology again? Ethan questions whether there is a way home at all. Again, he's got a dark mindset and he's already lost his innocence fast. He's morphing into a young Victor, honestly. Now, I want to know what you think. What do you think could happen as a result of Jade taking apart that triangle of totems that was probably warding off some sort of evil? Why do you think the crow crashed through the window? And do you trust Tilly? What do you think Jade's visions of the Puritan man and the others might mean? His other visions. Let me know your thoughts on this episode in the comments. Be sure to check out my deep dive into Tabitha's storyline from this same episode and how it ties into my overall theory on what Fromville is and how I think it works as a mirror dimension. That video is already here on my channel. So please leave a like and subscribe if you liked this video, and until next time, keep on deep diving and let's see what we can uncover together.